I'm Michael Dervan. I'm here in the splendour of Westport House to talk from afar with musicians from this year's Westport Festival of Chamber Music. The festival has had to relocate online because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, I'm only virtually here in Westport. In reality, I'm at home in Dublin, sitting in front of my computer to talk to members of the Marmen Quartet. At the other end of my Zoom connection is the quartet's leader, Johannes Marmen. He is 1,266 kilometers away from me in Malmö as the crow flies, or 1,948 over sea and land. That's 1,454 kilometers from Westport as the crow flies, or 2,149 over land and sea. Hi, Johannes.
Hello, Michael. Thanks so much for having us and me today.
Thank you for being here too. The obvious question, what has 2020 been like for you?
It's been a year of many ups and downs, actually. I'm Swedish and I live here in Sweden, although usually I don't get to spend that much time at home in my flat together with my wife. So in that sense, this year has really been a blessing. Although it's been difficult to see it that way many times because of the obvious different anxieties that come with the pandemic, not only health-wise and you know, the sort of empathy for the whole human race that's going through this, which brings a lot of anxiety, of course, but also just because I don't get the type of experiences that I usually get in my life, which has thrown me off balance a little bit in many ways. So it's been wonderful to be able to have a lot of time at home, but it's also been a challenge to really appreciate it as much as I would have wanted to. And I think many people feel the same way. At least many of my musician colleagues seem to recognize this feeling.
Well, certainly speaking for myself, if I imagined that I would have all the spare time that I've had this year, I would have expected to do all kinds of special things and projects. Excuse me. And shortly after the lockdown started, I realized I wasn't actually doing any of these things. And it's partly the strangeness, and it's also, at that stage, you had no idea how long it was going to last. So it was very hard to feel a sense of urgency. Though I have heard of some people who became highly productive and did more work than usual, but most people I've heard of, it's the other way around. Difficult to get your head around the whole situation.
Yeah, it's very interesting actually from a psychological point of view, how to tackle the situation that we're in, obviously. And this thing of not knowing how long this would last. I remember in spring that I definitely thought that by the time this first kind of wave was over, that things would more or less go back to normal. I didn't expect so many travel restriction policies and the like this far into the year, and which will probably also continue in the next year and so on. So if I would have seen it that way from the beginning, then maybe I would have had a different approach. But I don't know. I think it's actually very difficult to, once you're in a situation like this, which is unprecedented for most of us or all of us, I think, well, maybe people in some different parts of the world have experienced or epidemic at least before in their lifetime. But I think for most of us, it's completely unprecedented. And as such, I think it's very difficult to actually control what your response will be. So yeah, I think people shouldn't, you know, look back and be disappointed, for example, with how they've used their time in lockdown and so on, because I think it's just completely impossible to basically force yourself into doing something productive if you're not inspired to do that, or you know, and you're probably dealing with it in the way that you need to just automatically somehow. I believe.
And you had a ginormous concert schedule for 2020, and I presume most of that's actually gone.
Yes, I was looking at this in terms of pure numbers actually a few weeks ago, and I don't remember the exact number, but I think from the time when the pandemic started, or when it affected us for the first time, which was on the 16th of March, that's when we stopped playing concerts, until now, or until the end of this year actually. We were meant to play something like 80 concerts in that time, and then already in January and February, in first half of March, we had played already quite a few concerts, and we've played 8 of those 80 concerts. So yeah, it's or actually they weren't even the same concerts, different concerts in some cases, because some things have been cancelled or postponed, and then some other things have popped up because other groups have had to cancel their concerts, you know, from overseas and so on. So yeah. So
are you engaged in online teaching, that kind of thing, or can you still do it in person if you want to do it?
Personally, I don't teach. Unlike some of my other quartet members in my quartet. But we've done, together as a group, we've done some teaching actually in the course, Concordia course actually. We did some Zoom seminars and workshops, which was actually very rewarding. I just think that there's a limit to how far you can get with that. Having spoken to people who do teach a lot during the first lockdown, it was clear that after a few lessons, there's a definite limit to how far you can get in terms of instructing and teaching, and because you just don't hear.
You don't hear exactly precisely enough, yeah.
Yeah, and so those teachers have had to kind of become a bit more creative with their teaching if they were forced to continue to do them online. Rainer Schmidt, for example, the second violinist of the Marmen Quartet, he said in a Zoom seminar that was hosted by the Amsterdam Quartet Biennale that he thought it was much more valuable to use that time to talk about interpretation, for example, and to really get into the non-playing side of the music, because the playing side, it's just too, it becomes too abstract when it's over the phone or over the video call like this. Yeah.
Some people are encouraging students to make videos so that the quality is much higher, and then they discuss the videos so that the teacher hears exactly what's being done and the student can hear themselves. But obviously, I would imagine that there are aspects of teaching, especially music, that are impossible using Zoom because of the range of issues.
I think so. I think it's very limited, the possibilities here. Yeah.
So how did you end up being leader of a string quartet?
I didn't end up because it started that way. So I think we started actually as a kind of casual thing at the Royal College of Music. We just wanted to you know, it's just one of those things that happened. Like four friends just talked, you know, why don't we play some string quartets? And for some reason at that point, it was pretty obvious that I was going to play the first violin. I think actually we were three friends who started it. So we didn't have a second violinist at that point. And so, yeah, since the three of us had the initial idea, I think my first instinct wasn't to go and find a first violinist. My first instinct was to go and find a second violinist.
Yeah. And what's the best thing about being the leader of a quartet, both, you know, in terms of the personal interaction and the musical burden and the musical rewards?
Well, I'd like to think that it's no different than having any other position in the quartet, actually, except that for me personally, I just enjoy playing a lot of the melodic material a lot of the time, and that's because I think I'm, you know, I like to express emotion a lot to other people, and in the first violin chair, I think that there are quite a lot of opportunities to do that, especially in the classical music, and by classical I mean you know, from 1700 to 1900 maybe, and or 1700, you know, second half of the 18th century and onwards until yeah, the middle of the 20th century, because a lot of the music then is quite first violin orientated. Mm-hmm. But it's just that the different roles in the quartet, they carry different challenges, and I find the challenges that playing first violin comes with. I find those challenges very rewarding, artistically. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes I conceive of leaders as being a little bit prima donna-ish, because you're going up there in those exposed high and dangerous places. Do you feel at all prima donna-ish as a leader?
I don't actually. I know that I can sometimes probably be a little bit like, for example, there are situations where you need to feel kind of unencumbered musically, or in terms of the expression. Well, I mean, most times you want to feel that, right? But there are moments, for example, when I feel like there can be almost too much talk about exactly what needs to happen in music at a certain point, and that depending on the situation in my part, what I'm playing at that moment, I can feel that can be limiting. So I suppose that can be a slightly prima donna-like behavior. But I also think that, coming from my perspective, I think that's necessary, actually. Otherwise, I don't think the right thing will come across somehow. It's always a balance. Yeah. Yeah. I don't believe in this kind of string quartet playing where the first violin just does whatever he or she wants to do, and the rest just politely follows. Or you know, this kind of playing can be done in an extremely accomplished way as well. But I don't believe that that's the point of string quartet music in the end.
You know, there's a story about, I think it's the Schneiderhan Quartet in Vienna in the late 40s or early 50s, that apparently the leader sent somebody else to go to most of the rehearsals, and then, you know, just came on at the end to do the real thing himself. It's a bit like the story of the opera singer who, in the early part of the last century, used to send her maid to rehearsals, and the maid would say, "Madame will stand here," and then "Madame will stand there," and then "Madame will sing here." So
yeah, it's funny that, I mean, I can kind of understand how in the past that might have felt appropriate, because sometimes the string quartets were made up of one very accomplished violinist, like a soloist, for example, and the rest of them were maybe only part-time musicians or even amateur musicians, because the first violin parts from that time, again, you know, the Age of Enlightenment and a bit further as well, were so much more technically challenging than the other parts. So that was quite often how the quartets were made up back then. And so from that perspective, if you're in that situation, I can sort of understand that approach too. Although, I mean, to our modern minds, that sounds ridiculous, of course. Yeah.
What aspect of the job comes easiest, most naturally to you?
I think that's an interesting question, because everything is kind of easy and very difficult at the same time somehow. But I think what does come quite naturally to me is to what comes out when I play, I think, is mostly quite genuine, or like, I think it's mostly genuine. Even I've noticed, even when I'm stressed or nervous or find it very difficult to play for some reason, usually I think what comes out is quite genuine, and not necessarily good always, you know, or you know, I mean, not necessarily that I'm 100% happy, but I do believe that it's genuine most of the time. I think that's probably the easiest thing for me. Yeah.
Tell me about your own instrument, your violin. What's special about it and your relationship with it?
My violin, it's an Italian violin. It's a Galliano, a Joseph Galliano, and I think also to mention my bow is very interesting and important, because for me the bow is actually, I mean, I'm obviously fortunate to have such a, you know, a relatively good instrument that works in most situations, but I feel like my relationship with my bow is more personal. And it's an old bow. It was made in 1790, and it's kind of the missing link between a classical bow and a modern bow, sort of transitional bow, but more towards the modern model. It has a modern frog, for example, and the camber on it is also relatively modern. And I play all music with this bow, even you know, Sharin or Janacek, Philip Glass. I haven't played any Shostakovich on it yet, but I think it will it will do the job for that as well. And sorry, what was the question again? It was what
was special and about your relationship, and you're telling me about your bow. I've an interesting question straight away about that, because the earlier bows were lighter, and you know, they were balanced differently. Their responses were different. So how do you feel your bow impacts on, say, the Scerino, or might impact on the Shostakovich differently from a totally modern bow?
Yeah, I mean, so what I have always been looking for in a bow is a bow that doesn't decide for me what comes out, but where I feel like I can do basically anything. And I think this bow is definitely the one so far that has made me, the only bow so far that has made me feel like that. Now, who knows, in the future, maybe I will be looking for something in particular that has different qualities, or if I change my violin, maybe I notice that something else is required. But I'm of the view that the way that you play as a musician, the way that not as a musician, but rather as an instrumentalist, shouldn't come with any kind of default in terms of playing style, or you know, sometimes I think the drawback with these you know, very rich and beautiful and incredible schools of teaching of violin, there are a few traditional teaching schools, as I'm sure you know. One of the drawbacks of that can be that the way of playing itself determines what is being expressed, or the end result of what comes out of your instrument, rather than the sort of inception of an idea that you have, or a feeling that you have. So it can sometimes be like it can sometimes make that whole creative process a little bit less transparent, I think. And I think it's the same with instruments, that your tools that you use, they should enable you to have as transparent a creative process as possible, so that you know, when you have an instinct, or when you feel something, that the way that translates into your instrument and then out into the room and to the ears of the audience, that just works on a very transparent and instinctual level. And that's what I'm always looking for when I look at instruments and bows and so on. And I think this setup which I have right now is working very well, especially with the bow. So yeah, that's
I would make a parallel with acting, that there are some actors who, especially like the late Sean Connery, who are always totally themselves no matter what else they're being. And then there are other actors like Daniel Day-Lewis, who can sometimes be unrecognizable as himself. He's gone so far into the role. And I'm interpreting what you're saying as meaning you want to be able to be a chameleon. You want to be able to completely different, if that's what this particular music demands.
Yes, in a way, I think, and this analogy with actors I find very interesting, actually, because I also believe in the that every music that you play, or everything that you play, has parameters which are not defined by yourself as a person, but by the music, how it's written, and what defines that music. I think as in some actors, method acting, for example, those actors, they are able to completely immerse themselves in a role, which then means that when they're on stage, or on you know, when they're shooting a scene, and they have an interaction with another actor, or not, but regardless, you know, when they react to things, and when they have instincts in the moment, all those reactions and instincts will be completely authentic to the role that they're playing. But I think it still contains a lot of that actor's personality as well. It's just that it's within the actor's own creation or understanding of the role. And I think for musicians it should work basically the same, actually, because that will enable you to be completely free with the music that you're playing, and completely trust your instinct and trust your emotions without ever getting in the way of the music. I think that shows a very deep understanding of the music if you're able to get to that point. And that's, I think it's a wonderful challenge and a wonderful aim to have, actually, because there's like no end to how deeply you can try and understand and know the music, basically, and yourself as well.
So, changing subject, where do you see yourself in the quartet as being, say, 12 months away from now?
I think, I mean, I'm an optimistic person, so I think that we will be on tour playing concerts more or less as usual, because we're noticing that governments and countries and departments and so on are constantly working on ways to keep our society running, and traveling is our biggest challenge at the moment. Of course, when there are actual lockdowns in countries, then concerts don't happen, and that's obviously impossible to do anything about. But in fact, for us, travel has been one of the biggest challenges, and I cautiously hope that in 12 months' time there will be structures in place to make it possible for musicians to travel basically in an unrestricted way. And yeah, that's what I think.
So, and all being well, then you'll have been to Westport by this time next year. Yes,
that's very true.
So I'm so looking forward to hearing you all together for the first time. So thank you very much for taking time out for this interview.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.